Let's continue with Lesson 19, which is the Bill of Rights, Part 2. And just like in Lesson 18, our text is that we can summarize the rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights. So let's pick up with the Fifth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment is sometimes referred to as the Due Process Amendment, and we will discuss that idea of due process in more detail in Lesson 20. But for right now, we're going to list some of the rights under the Fifth Amendment, one of which is that you must be indicted by a grand jury, which means to be formally accused of a crime. A grand jury is usually a group of citizens, somewhere between 20 to 25 people, who a prosecutor will present the evidence against the accused, and if the grand jury believes that that evidence is sufficient to take it to a trial, then they will be formally indicted and informed of the crime against them. It also means that there is no double jeopardy. This means that the prosecutor gets one opportunity to convict a defendant of a crime, and a defendant going forward is the person who's been accused of the crime. But like we said, the prosecutor gets one opportunity, and that if they fail to do so, if the defendant is acquitted, then they cannot bring them back to trial for that same offense. It also means that the state cannot take private property without due process. For example, in issues of eminent domain, if the state determines that they need your property, say to build a highway or a building, then there must be a formal hearing, and they must take you. You have the right to ask for a formal hearing and to go through due process before they do that. It also means that they're going to have to pay you what the property is worth. This is the one that most people are familiar with the Fifth Amendment, and that is I plead the Fifth, which means that you have the right not to testify against yourself. If you're brought on trial, the defendant has the right to choose whether they will testify, because if they choose to do so, that means that they can be cross-examined, but it is entirely up to the defendant whether they choose to do that. For example, in the famous O.J. Simpson trial, O.J. Simpson chose to not testify in his own defense, and he was still acquitted. This also means that if you choose to remain silent, that in itself is not evidenced against you. The Fifth Amendment is based upon the idea, and the whole idea of due process, as a matter of fact, is based upon the idea that the defendant is innocent until proven guilty and must be treated as if they are innocent of the crime until a jury and the due process declares them guilty. Then we have the Seventh Amendment, and this provides for the right to have a jury in a civil trial. Now, you might say, well, the Sixth Amendment covers that right. The Sixth Amendment says you have the right to a jury in a criminal trial. But the Seventh Amendment applies to civil cases. Civil cases are those that deal with non-criminal issues such as money or family law. So that would be such as lawsuits or wills, divorce cases, or custody battles. Things that are not criminal but nonetheless do involve the law and involve some sort of trial. That the person involved in the trial, the defendant, has the right to request a jury in that civil trial. Then we have the Eighth Amendment, and this is the one against cruel or unusual punishment. This applies both to punishment in the event of conviction or in the event of bail at the moment of arrest. It means that the person has the right to request a reasonable bail, and that the bail needs to match the severity of the crime. For example, a minor crime such as shoplifting or a minor assault would result in a lower bail, whereas a serious crime, a serious felony, and I should bring up the term, minor crimes are called misdemeanors. So the bail for a misdemeanor, a small crime, would be a lot less than the bail for if you're accused of a felony, which is a major crime such as theft or murder. And that also applies to the punishment of the crime. Punishment for misdemeanors is going to be much less. It might involve some jail time or maybe no jail time at all. Whereas felonies involve sometimes many years of imprisonment and possibly even the death penalty. But even with the death penalty, it cannot be cruel or unusual. The state has taken great efforts to try to find methods of execution where the death penalty is legal, in which the execution again does not inflict cruel or unusual amounts of pain. Then we have the silent Ninth Amendment, and by this we mean the text of the amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. That's a lot of fancy talk that basically just means this. The founders were aware that it was not possible to write every right that people might need into the Constitution, and in fact, this was a concern of the Federalists about having a Bill of Rights at all. So the Ninth Amendment essentially says that just because the Constitution doesn't say that you have this right, doesn't mean you don't. Some examples of rights that people have that are not listed. We have the right to a free and public education in all 50 states. You have the right to get married, to have a family, to drive a car, to get the job of your choice. So these are all examples of rights that are not covered by the other bills, the other amendments, but are nonetheless provided by the silent Ninth Amendment. This is sometimes also called the People's Rights Amendment. And then finally we have the 10th Amendment, which is called the States' Rights Amendment. And this says that all power not delegated, which means given to the federal government, is reserved, which means saved, for the state governments and the people. Article 1 of the Constitution goes into great detail, listing exactly what the powers of the federal government and the Congress and the President are going to be. And the 10th Amendment says that anything not on that list belongs to the states. Examples of this are states choose their own marriage law. Although we did see an example here of the federal government extending the rights of the 14th Amendment right to same-sex marriage in just this last summer with that Supreme Court case. States have the right to set up their own local government, such as counties. States also have the right to regulate their highways. Another big example is that states have the right to regulate education. They decide what will be taught in their schools and what will be the requirements for graduation and how teachers are to be certified. So all those are examples of 10th Amendment rights by the states. So our Lesson 19 thoughts. What would be the risk of being on trial without the protections listed in the Bill of Rights? I want you to think about this because in Lesson 20 we're going to talk about due process and exactly what the protections of someone accused of a crime are going to be and what's meant by due process. And we'll see you then.